spirit portals, do you believe in people, objects, or places that are gateways to another world, another dimension, another galaxy? If your house is haunted, is it really your house being haunted, or is it you that's haunted? Anyways, grab a blanket, turn off your light for 3 true scary stories, where we go off into the far outreaches of the universe, into the other dimension, into the 4th dimension, into the Twilight Zone. Was our house a portal? My childhood house was built in 1959 in a Detroit, Michigan suburb that officially became known as the Dearborn Heights. 4 years later, in 1963, my family moved in as soon as the house was finished. I was conceived in this house. When my mother was pregnant with me, she did not like to be in the basement. She could not understand why. Since the basement had been finished, complete with paneling and a built-in TV and stereo system, the family always ended the day down there. I'm not sure when the first experience were witnessed, but my family and visitors alike reported odd occurrences in that house the entire time we lived there. Most experiences happen in the basement, although my sisters, my mother, and others reported seeing a green orb or shadow of some kind move through the upstairs hallway on several occasions. My oldest sister had the most experiences, while I had the fewest. One night, while she was babysitting my middle sister and me, she and her friend were downstairs watching TV when they heard the dishwasher upstairs banging open and closed. My other sister and I were both sound asleep at the time, and there was no one else in the house. Other experiences included several times something that looked like a 4th of July sparkler was seen in the laundry room in the basement, far from any electrical outlet. Banging sounds were heard in the basement, most of which, but not all, were centered around my father's darkroom. He'd been an amateur photographer, and voices. My oldest sister and another one of her friends were on their way downstairs when they heard adults having a conversation down there. They confirmed that the TV was off, the stereo was off, and no feasible explanation was ever found. My mother had experiences. My father had experiences, although he never admitted that until he was in his 70s, and he never exactly said what those experiences had been. The neighbor boys were frightened away one summer day when they entered to water our houseplants while we were on vacation. They never agreed to be alone in that house ever again. My oldest sister reported seeing the figure of a man dressed in Victorian-era clothing several times, always upstairs in or near her bedroom. My own experiences were far more limited than those of the rest of my family. One ongoing activity I can personally attest to involved my dad's dark room. That room was directly below a bedroom I shared with my middle sister. Whenever my dad was in his dark room with the door closed, we knew we were not allowed to open the door, but we could talk to him through the furnace vent in our bedroom. It was like our own little intercom. We were also very familiar with the sounds of him working in his dark room, such as the banging of his metal chemical trays. There were many nights when we were awakened in the night, hearing those same sounds. Meanwhile, Dad was across the hall snoring. Everyone was present and accounted for upstairs. The furnace was not running, and we did not have central air conditioning. Those bumps in the nights were never explained. One particular incident involved a Halloween sleepover. I was camping out in the basement with several of my friends. During the day, we had turned the furnace room and playroom into a funhouse or haunted house. I can't remember everything we set up in that funhouse, but I do remember a broom we had hanging from the ceiling. That night, I was awakened by a knocking sound coming from that room. I confirmed all my friends were sleeping, and my family members were all still upstairs sleeping. The next day, I tested out various scenarios to recreate the sound, and the only thing I came up with was physically moving the broom to make it hit the wall. It took more force than any mere breeze could provide to move the broom and recreate that knocking sound. At the age of 14, I was brave enough to move my bedroom into the basement to gain some privacy, something my oldest sister to this day cannot understand. I had no real experiences after that move, but whenever I woke in the middle of the night, I refused to open my eyes to look at anything until I switched on a light, and then I was hesitant to turn it off again. We moved out only a few months afterward. I often wonder if I was more immune to the occurrences due to being conceived in that house. I can't find any evidence that the house had been built on the site of some horrific event, so I find myself wondering if it had been some kind of a portal. Research I've been able to perform on the property has been scarce and limited to online information. I did discover that the area might have been on the grounds of a military reserve during the Civil War era, but I've never heard of a Civil War battle being fought in Michigan. I have not learned of any horrific events or accidents in the vicinity. Native American tribes includes Chippewa and Ottawa. I have also discovered that while all of our immediate neighbors continue to live in their houses nearly 40 years later, our home has been resold multiple times. A recent visit with one of our neighbors had him using both hands to count the names of those who have come and gone since our family left. Whether that means odd bumps in the night continue to occur in that house, making no one want to stick around, remains unknown. And yes, as children, we did have a Ouija board. Yes, we did play with it, always in the basement. After all, that's where the ghosts seemed to be, and yes, we did believe we'd made contact with entities, and frequently ended the game by running upstairs screaming. Although I can't remember any specifics, such as what names or what words the spirits had supposedly given us. Ghost portal and wall. I just found this site, so I have a few weird stories I'm sharing. Back in 2000, my friend was living in a house that she rented with her husband. She told me she thought the house was haunted because things would get moved around and cookies would be removed from the package in the cupboard, crumbled on the kitchen counter but not eaten. A few weeks later, she told me that the wall in the guest bedroom was making a buzzing noise ever since she placed a bookcase on that wall. They moved the bookcase over a few feet and the noise stopped. Her husband could feel the vibrations, but they couldn't figure it out. Her husband told her not to tell anyone about the incident. My daughter, who was 12 at the time, was spending the night at that house. When I dropped her off, I told her not to worry about the ghost because my friend thought it was a child and nothing bad had ever happened. Later that night, at my daughter's urging, my friend gave my daughter a demonstration of how the wall made a buzzing noise when the bookcase was placed in a certain spot. When my friend moved the bookcase away from the buzzing spot, as they called it, my daughter touched the wall with her hand. They were shocked to see her hand go right through the solid wall. My daughter quickly pulled her hand out. She said it felt weird while it was in there. It was kind of vibrating. She could feel some kind of electric type energy. When I heard about it, I told my friend to take a camera and put it through the portal and take a few pictures, but she was too afraid, and her husband made her promise to leave things alone and not to mess with things that we don't understand. My friend later found out from a neighbor that a 9-year-old girl had died in the same house some 10 years earlier. She had bad asthma. Weird. The Mirror Portal. Where do I begin with this one? I guess from the time the mirror was purchased and refurbished. 6 years ago, my room was redecorated and repainted. One of the things my grandmother chose for my room was an antique mirror in an oval shape. The frame wasn't what she wanted for it, so she had the frame taken off and replaced with a white frame. A few nights after, it was hung in my room. The spirit named James hung out near it often. Later on, he would disappear into it. About 4 years ago, I met someone, and I'm glad I did since she experiences things really similar to mine, and we were able to confide in each other. And activity started to pick up. I would see these figures in the mirror, near the mirror, or looking at the mirror. Often there were voices saying, "Come closer to us. Come and look into the mirror." I just thought it was my imagination, but apparently I was wrong. I began to feel things touching my arms and neck at first. Now imagine a room about 9 feet by 9 feet. The door is on the south side, the window on the north, and the bed on the west, and the mirror is on the east. During that year, I had a friend, not the person mentioned before, spend the night. She knew nothing about the mirror. She slept on the bed and I was on the floor next to her. She decided she would play a prank and try to scare me. I did not hear her get up, and suddenly I saw a black figure at my feet, so I jolted up. My friend screamed. She was at the foot of the bed at this time, and exclaimed that my face was liquid paper white, and it looked like my eyes were gone. After this, we tried to go back to sleep. I soon heard a voice say, "Get her away." She then asked if I had gotten up and was standing by the mirror. I said no, and she said there was something there. I looked up, and then there was a sharp pain. I didn't say anything except, "Your eyes must be tired. Try to get some sleep." That night, I watched over her and made sure she wasn't harmed. The next morning, I had a huge bruise on my shoulder. Now, months later, the first girl mentioned spent the night for the first time. Again, this one knew nothing about the mirror. We were laying in our sleeping arrangements, her on the floor and me on the bed, when she suddenly asked, "Do you believe in spirits?" I sat up and looked at her and asked, "Why?" I didn't really tell her about any of my spirits, but then I paused and said, "Yes, I do, and I can see and hear them." She looked at me and said, "Really? I can too." I actually felt happy. I always thought I would be alone in life with this curse. We began talking, and she told me about her spirits, and I told her about James. She then asked if anything ever happened near my mirror, and I asked, "Why?" She replied with a scared tone, "I see something in it." I looked over there, and then my eyesight went black, as it normally did when an evil spirit was near. I then saw what looked like a 7-foot-tall skeleton, being with decayed flesh, long feathers coming from certain bones, and a red glowing spot from an eye socket. I was shocked, then asked my friend if one of her spirits looked like this, and she said no. "What you just saw sounds like what is called an ancient," she said after a while. Ever since that night, I cannot look at the mirror full on. When I do, my skin turns pale, and I think I get black rings under my eyes. One day I stared at it for 5 minutes, and when I looked away, my mom said I look like a zombie. Now then, we must skip to about 6 months ago. It was about the end of April, beginning of May when things got worse. I moved my mirror to the southern wall and my bed to the eastern wall. My nights became restless as I saw a continuous stream of things near the mirror and voices. James was no longer there. He had been banished to oblivion, as I was told by a different spirit. Apparently, that spirit was wrong. I watched terrified as James came towards me out of the mirror. All I remember is severe pain, and the next morning there were scratches and bruises on my entire body. This continued for a while until one night, I was dressing after a shower, and I leaned over to pick up my towel and I felt something enter my personal space. It was extremely painful and I ran out of there. I went into the bathroom and checked myself and found blood. I was not on my period, and it wasn't the same color as my period blood. I was scared to go back into my room, but I had to. That night, I felt the same thing and James took my innocence. The next morning, when I used the bathroom, there was tons of blood. Again, this is not my period because I did not bleed anymore after that. This continued on certain days until finally, I told my best friend. Being a Christian, she told me to grab a cross and say a prayer with her. I did so, and there was a feeling of relief and peace in my room. The mirror, which was always fogged over, was crystal clean. I had never seen it this clear before. For a few days, I was at peace, until the sensation began again. The mirror refogged, only darker this time. Night after night, I've been tormented by the beings in my mirror. I've become more quiet and distant from people. I'll space out randomly for long periods of time, get less sleep, getting random bursts of anger and heavy feelings of loneliness. I've been slacking in school, lashing out at friends and family, and I'm afraid I may start harming them. And daily I'm finding new bruises and scratches that occur at random times. I do not bruise easily, and just today I got in the shower with no bruise on my shoulder, but got out with several bruises. I even have a bruise on my left arm in the shape of a fingerprint. On my right arm, there's a bruise that goes from my wrist to my elbow. I am dead serious when I say I never hit my arm on anything before this appeared. Now, it's starting to even watch my mother. She's seen a shadow figure in her mirror. Her printer, which holds no ink, will print a page, and her cell phone will go off at 7:55 p.m. every night. I become so afraid, I went as far to get a Catholic rosary and put it on my mirror. Ever since then, it's gotten extremely dark. My friend had suggested I throw it away. That is what I'm doing.